Happy Easter, everyone. Here we are on Thursday within the octave of Easter. Octave means 8. So for big feast days in the church, and Easter's the biggest one, for big feast days, the church always gives us an octave to celebrate. 8 days of celebrating. For these 8 days following Easter, every day for us is like Easter Sunday. And that's why within the octave of Easter, the church in her Gospels gives us various resurrection accounts, various accounts of how Jesus appeared to his disciples to let them know the good news that he is risen from the dead. And what we see today is that it took them a little while to get used to that idea. It took them a little while to really come to know and believe that Jesus really had risen. There's an old tradition in the church at Easter. One person, when they're meeting another, can say, "He is risen." And the response comes back, "He is truly risen." It's this tradition of reminding ourselves that the Lord really, truly is risen. And we see this struggle that the apostles have in believing it in the gospel today. Today's gospel is a continuation of yesterday's gospel. So if you watched the reflection yesterday, you know that Father Divine talked about the road to Emmaus and how this, what they thought was a stranger, appeared to them as they were walking to Emmaus. But later on they realized, hey, wait a minute, that was Jesus. Were our hearts not, they said, burning within us? And then he was revealed to them in the breaking of the bread. So today's gospel picks up where that left off, and it talks about the disciples recounting what took place to them along the way, telling the story of how the Lord appeared to them and how they recognized him in the breaking of the bread. And then as they're talking, what happens? Jesus appears yet again and says, "Peace be with you." But the gospel says they were startled and terrified, and they thought that they were seeing a ghost. The idea that Jesus has risen, that he has truly risen, is something that it took the apostles time to come to terms with. And it can take us time too, to really come to know and to believe that he really is risen from the dead, that Jesus is not a ghost, that he is alive. And it's that great truth that has been proclaimed to the world since the first Easter 2,000 years ago and is still being proclaimed now, even in a time of quarantine. It's being proclaimed through the means of digital communication. That great truth is everything. Because if we're going to come to know and to believe and to love Jesus Christ, it begins with coming to believe and to know that he really is alive. He's a God of the living, not a God of the dead. And that because he's alive, because he's not just a ghost, he's not just a happy memory, he's not a myth, he's not somebody that we reach back into the past like with our ancestors and tell stories about and recount and think of with fond and happy memories. No. Jesus is every bit as alive as you and I are. He's even more alive, we could say, than we are. Because he's alive, he can work in our lives, and he does, which is why the church gives us these 8 days to contemplate and, you better believe, to celebrate. I was just telling the seminarians, hey, it's the octave of Easter. Whatever we do for dinner tonight, it's got to be big. It's a feast day. We must feast. As I like to tell them, I don't make the rules, I just follow them. That's why the church gives us these 8 days. And it's what we should continually be thinking about, contemplating, asking the Lord to help us to come to know and to believe more and more that yes, it was written, as Jesus said at the end of the gospel, that the Christ would suffer. But then on the third day, he would rise from the dead. And that repentance for the forgiveness of sins, as he says at the end of the gospel, would be preached in his name to all the nations, beginning from Jerusalem. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. And then the last line of the gospel is, you are witnesses of these things. And so a good thing to do during this octave of Easter, in order to renew our faith and our belief, our knowledge, and our sheer conviction that Jesus really is risen from the dead, is to look for the ways that he has worked and he continues to work in our lives. That is the work of somebody who is not dead, but who is alive. And then, with the whole universal church, including the universal church that came before us, the saints who are in heaven, the holy souls in purgatory, with all of our ancestors in the faith, we too will join our voices to the ancient and yet ever true Christian anthem that Jesus Christ is risen. He is truly risen.